All right, this week we will pick up with verse 8. We are in Shemot, also known as Exodus, chapter 33. But to recap the verse 7, which got a little messed up, we had some technical issues last week. The translation is, and Moshe took the tent, not a tent, not his tent, but the tent, and set up. Of course, it said stretched it out, but that means he set it up. So he set it up on the outside of the camp, some distance from the camp, and called it the tent of meetings, or the tent of appointed times. And it came to pass that all who sought Yahweh, it does call him by name, went out to the tent of appointed times that was outside the camp. So here's the reason why I decided to recap this is I don't know if you guys realize it, but as far as we know, the tent of meetings had not been set up at this point. Remember, Moshe has just come down from the mountain and found everybody worshiping a golden cow. So probably wasn't set up at the time. Could have been. We don't know for sure. There's argument for and against whether it already was set up and he tore it down and moved it. Don't know if I buy that. It's a little too close in to the happenings here. So, but he does take a tent. This is the tent, which in Hebrew indicates that it is the actual tent that we think of as the tent of appointed times. And he went outside the camp quite a ways from the camp and he set it up. So all those images that you see where the tent is inside the camp, not so much, at least not at this point. Maybe it'll change later, maybe it won't. We don't know. Well, some of you do. But anyway, it's important that we see this for what it is. They were not ever worthy. See, this is the problem that I had with this verse before, was all of the sages, and I should do this when I say sages, I don't have a lot of respect for them. You know why? Because they didn't speak Hebrew, and this bothers me. It bothers me immensely. People say, oh, Maimonides spoke. No, he didn't. He spoke Arabic. Everything that he wrote, everything he wrote in Arabic. And he was 1,200 years after the fact. What the heck could he possibly have known? I'm just throwing that out there. I know he's the end-all, be-all, but guys, we got to stop just accepting stuff and start asking questions. Start asking the right questions. Where did you get that information? Where did Maimon get that information? Where did Rashi get that information? We have to start asking ourselves, where did they get this? Because I guarantee you, most of it, they just made up. That's what bugs me, is that they made it up. Do they ever get stuff right? Of course they do. They say some things that are mind-boggling at times. You just, wow, you just blew my mind. It's so awesome. But most of the time it's, I can't believe they said that. I can't believe those words came out of their mouth. And this is one of those times. They're arguing over some of the strangest things where, and the main one was, got off on that diatribe and forgot what I was going to say. They're arguing that the Jews were somehow worthy of God's presence. No, they weren't. There's no human being on this planet ever at any time who was ever worthy of God's presence. Except for Mashiach. We do know Mashiach is human. Whether you believe it was Yeshua or not doesn't really matter. But we do know if Mashiach has been here, then he was a human that was worthy of God's presence. If he hasn't been here, he will be a human worthy of God's presence. That's the only point there. But beyond that, there will not be a human being ever in any of human history that is ever worthy of God. No, we weren't created to be worthy of God. So the idea that they were somehow worthy and they were picked because they were worthy, that bugs me, because that's just us saying, hey, we're better than everybody else. And no, we're not. We're just as human as everybody else, and we make just as many mistakes as everybody else. And really, the difference between us and everybody else is all of our mistakes are in black and white. Somebody wrote it all down, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then the sages came along and tried to get rid of the bad and the ugly and just keep the good. Well, I'm sorry. The men and the women who wrote what we call the Tanakh now, they gave the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's hang on to that because it gives us hope. If Moshe, being a murderer, could lead all of God's children out of bondage, that gives me hope that I have a shot in this world when I start feeling down on myself, right? If David, who was a womanizing man who got another man's wife pregnant and then murdered that man to cover up his sin, if he could be the king of all of Israel, then that gives me hope because I've never done any of that crap, right? Can a rabbi say crap? Just saying. Just asking. But you get what I'm saying. We got to leave that stuff in there. We can't go taking it out to try to make us look good. We don't need to look good. We need to look just as human as we are. We need to stop elevating people to a place that no human could ever be. Moshe was not a saint. David was not a saint. None of these men were saints. Now, we do call them Hasid, the Hasidim. That does translate to saints, but not the Christian idea of saints. You guys know what I'm saying. But they're in there arguing, and I've, again, forgot what the argument was. Let me go back and look at the thing again. I'm not starting off well here. I just shouldn't do these things. Start on something, I have a reason for it, and then I go down that stupid road and I don't remember any part of why I started it. Dang it. Oh, the worthiness. Somebody keep me on track here. It's about worthiness. No human is ever worthy. Moshe was not worthy. David was not worthy. Samuel was not. Was that Shamuel? Shalomo. None of these people were worthy of anything. Nothing. They did not deserve God's presence. And so when the cow was built and those people worshipped it, it did not make them unworthy because they were never worthy in the first place. This bothers me to no end when I read this stuff. I had to leave stuff out that they argued because it makes me so angry. Why are we doing this? Why has Judaism done this to itself? These people did what any other race of people would have done. This was not unique to the Jews. Therefore, we have to somehow whitewash it and make Aharon innocent. He was not innocent. The text clearly places it on his shoulders. He was at fault. What he did, he knew was wrong. Wrong. He knew it was wrong. And he did it anyway. And the people knew it was wrong, and they did it anyway. Is this because all Jews are bad? No, it's because all humans are bad. They weren't seeing God doing things their way, and so they got rid of God and made him a little cow. It's what everybody does today. The atheists, they don't see God doing things their way, so they invented a new God called There Is No God. It's still a religion, and they still have the God, the ultimate thing being that no God exists. They therefore worship the God who doesn't exist. But it's total worship, and it's the more they argue it, the more you know that they do believe in God, and they're just mad at him. Everybody's got to find some way to make a God that will walk before them instead of a God that they have to walk before. And it's what the New Testament period called walking in the flesh as opposed to walking in the Spirit. Because the Spirit, these people knew in the first century that the Spirit of God was the Word of God. It was not the third person of the Trinity that was invented 400 or 500 years later. It did not exist in the first century. It did not exist when the New Testament letters were written. They were not talking about a Trinity. They didn't know what a Trinity was. They were talking about the Word of God being the Spirit of God. And when we live according to the Word, it says do this, so we do it. It says don't do this, so we don't do it. That's called walking in the Spirit. When we say, you know what, phooey on that. I like my pork. I like my chops. I like my lobster. I like my alligator or whatever, and phooey on God, then you're creating for yourself a God who will walk before you, just like what just happened. That's what the Western world, that's what the whole world does. It's a people thing, not a Jewish thing. And we're all like this, all of us. So we got to embrace the good, the bad, and the ugly. We have to embrace it all, because if we don't embrace it, then we're sticking our head in the sand just waiting for the next wave to come. We're sticking our head in the sand waiting for the next Hitler to show up. That's what we're doing. If every time Judaism has tried to renegotiate its deal with God, there has been a Holocaust. Every single time. And that hasn't just happened once with Hitler. It's happened repeatedly throughout our history. Repeatedly, because we keep trying to renegotiate our deal with God. We keep trying to build a golden calf. That's what it boils down to. Does that make us unworthy? No, because we were never worthy. To become unworthy indicates that at some point we were in fact worthy. We have never, ever been worthy. We will never, ever be worthy. So let's get past this idea that these guys spent page after page after page arguing so nonsensically. And let's move on and accept it all, because it's what gives us hope. I hope you guys are not mad at me over that. Sometimes I get this way. Let's go on to verse 8. And be, this is the literal English, and be as go out, Moshe, to the tent he arise they, all the people, and stood they, man entrance tent he, and looked they after Moshe, till it can become, or came he, the tent her. You're like, what? That don't make any sense at all. Well, it will. V'haya, and it came to pass. It came to pass is really a good way to say it in English, and it came to pass. It happened that. It became such that. You know, I mean. Kezet. They've added the kaf to the front of this word, so it's as go out, literally. It's to go out, to go forth. They even use it of germination, of plants expanding, if you will, and stuff like that. But it's going forth, Moshe. So as Moshe went forth, then it says El, so it's to Ha'ohel. So as he went toward it, they want you to get the idea of what's going on. As he gets up in the morning, and according to these other arguments, Moshe put his own tent out there. So apparently he's just sleeping in a sleeping bag, or, you know, got him they didn't exist back then. So he's just got his blankie over there, and he's sleeping under the stars. Everybody else has a tent, but no, Moshe put his tent out there, and he has nowhere to live now. So, I mean, that's why I didn't get into the arguments, because it upset me so badly how dumb the arguments were. But as he left his tent, this is what we should know is going on. As he left his tent and he's walking out of this encampment, going past the outer gate of it, if it in fact was surrounded, which it probably was not. But as he goes outside of this area of the people and goes some distance away, because remember, it's not right there by the people. He goes some distance. Why is it some distance away? Why was it taken out? Because the people mixed the clean with the unclean. Why do we get driven out of God's presence? Because we mix the clean with the unclean. They were in a place that God had made clean. And what do? They make a calf and worship the calf, thus making that place unclean. So what happens when you're going to have a place where God's going to be? It has to be pure. It has to be clean. So Moshe took the tent of meetings. He marched it outside of the tent, where the encampment that was now unclean, not that was unworthy, but was unclean. Guess I should have made that a little clearer earlier. So now, as he's getting out of his own tent, he's going outside of this encampment, some distance away from it. Apparently, they can all still see him. And as he's on his way to the tent, Yah Kuma Adonai, Hoshiani Elohai. Some of you recognize that song. Anyway, so as he was headed that way, literally this is he arise they. So they arose. Everybody stood to their feet, if you will. Everybody got up from their seated or lying down position. And it says Kol, so that's everybody. Ha'am, so all of the people, everybody, as they saw him going toward the tent, they stood up. Venitzvo, well, in this, the word ends, they stood there in that place. They got up and stood. Let's say it that way. Ish, this is man. Petach, that's the entrance. So he's standing at the entrance of what? Ahalo, of his tent. So every man, and remember this is in the masculine. It doesn't mean that, I mean, you can't say definitively that means that the wife and the children were all still inside the tent, not paying attention. It could be that way, but it could be that every man, woman, and child stood up. Can't say that definitively either, because they say things in the masculine. So in the masculine, it can either turn out to be that it was just the man that stood, or it was kind of a mixture of all the above. But since it says Kol, it'd just almost be everybody, right? So it can be either it was every man or that it was every person. You can pick however you want to. It doesn't really matter. Because if the man stood by himself and the family did not, the man represented the whole family. And in the Jewish world of that time period, that was the whole family. Anyway, the next word is vehi betu, and looked they looked, they beheld, they watched him as he walked by. But it's also, this word is to rest one's hope in anything, to look at something expectantly or with hope. Then it says ahare, which is after, so they are looking behind Moshe. In other words, they're watching him walk away. Ad, it says, which we would say till or until. Bo'u, until he came, until he arrived. Ha ohela, until he arrived at the tent. So you get the picture. As he stepped out of his tent and started toward the tent of meetings, everybody, either everybody there or at the very least every man that represented each family, and what do you do with the widows, and anyway, everybody stood up, or somebody from every tent stood up at the entrance of their own tent, and they watched him as he walked from his place out of the camp over to wherever the distance was to where the tent of meetings was set up, and they watched him from behind, because they're watching him walk away until he reached the tent. So the translation, and it came to pass, as Moshe went out to the tent, all the people rose, and they stood, every man at the entrance of his tent, and looked expectantly after Moshe until he went into the tent. Looked expectantly or looked with hope. I mean, think about it. They're in a bad place right now. So they're either expecting that Moshe will make things right, or they're at the very least, they're hoping that he can make things right for them. That is where we are at this particular point. Rashi wrote that the people remained standing out of reverence until Moshe was no longer in sight. And while this may sound like Captain Obvious to some, the Hebrew text was in fact changed a little in some translations, and it led to some misunderstandings which Rashi was attempting to clear up. And he was right about this. Again, the man did not speak Hebrew. I used to wonder, how on earth do all of these sages, how did they all make the same mistake? And then I was reading in the Onkelos by Drauzine and Wagner, and they mentioned in there that At least that's where I think I was reading it. I'm pretty sure it was. But they mentioned that all of these people were using Onkelos's work. So his stuff was written in Aramaic, not Hebrew. Captivity in Babylon. When they left Babylon, they immediately went right back to Hebrew, as they have every single time in Jewish history. There were pockets of Jews who still spoke Aramaic at the time, Onkelos being one of them, but the Dead Sea Scrolls prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that Hebrew was a language, because Aramaic was only used a couple of times. Greek was, well, a few times. But Greek was only used twice, and they were apologizing for how bad the Greek was. So, I don't know why I got off on that, but that's just a little tidbit I thought I'd throw in there for you. But these guys did not speak Hebrew. They're building everything off of this Aramaic text. And the Aramaic text was very much messed with. Onkelos had a problem with the idea that God had hands and God had eyes and God had a nose and a mouth and that God had feelings. He had a problem with that, so he changed the text constantly. I have a problem with him doing that, because God himself said, don't add to or take away from it. And that's exactly what he was doing. And then these guys that we now call sages used his work. So it's why every one of them were wrong every time Onkelos was wrong. And Onkelos was often wrong, because everything he did was literal. And he's dealing with a language and a time period that was not literal. It was idiomatic. The whole entire language was idiomatic. It wasn't that they have a million idioms like modern Hebrew does today. That's something left over from a time when the entire language was idiomatic. But when Hellenism came into the Second Temple period, you're talking 150 to 250 years prior to the first century CE. In that time period, Hellenism starts to take over, and Jews begin to grow up speaking Greek as their first language, and some of them didn't speak Hebrew at all. They were called Gentiles. Yeah, in the Second Temple period, non-Jews were not called Gentiles. They were called many things, but they were not called Gentiles. It's been since the Christian takeover of what used to be Jewish, the New Testament. It was the invention of the Catholic religion, which ultimately is now called the Christian religion, which it really shouldn't be, but it is, because they're lumping everything together in one mixture now, even though the one really had not a lot to do with the other. One came from the other, but they were very different. There's a reason for the split. I went blank again.
They only spoke they just spoke Greek.
So you get this Second Temple period, this Hellenistic period, where Jews, born and raised Jews, don't even speak the Hebrew language anymore. They're called Gentiles. They are called Gentiles. It's after Catholicism comes along that they begin to call themselves Gentiles, because they'd come up with this idea that some Jewish Messiah came, and instead of fixing the covenant with the Jews like is promised by the prophets, their Jewish Messiah came along and kicked out the Jews and started something new with the non-Jews, which they had to use the word Gentile to put themselves in the book. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had anything to do with the book, right? That's why I'm throwing that out there, because there are people who don't realize the Gentiles of the New Testament are not non-Jews. They are, in fact, non-Hebrew speaking Jews. So your sages are Gentiles. They're non-Hebrew speaking Jews. They didn't know that the language of Hebrew was an idiomatic language. So everything that they did was literal, because they're using onkelos, who was a Gentile. He was a non-Hebrew speaking, well, I shouldn't say that. I can't say that he was a non-Hebrew speaking Gentile. He was actually a Hebrew speaker, because he did Hebrew and he did, well, we think he did the Hebrew. So, but if he did the Hebrew, the problem is these sages that came along, they didn't do the Hebrew part, they did the Aramaic part. So it's because they did the Aramaic part, the non-Hebrew speakers, they're the Gentiles. Anyway, I hope you understand that. And with these Gentiles not knowing that this is an idiomatic language, they made everything literal. And so when onkelos did something, everything he did was literal, which is why it's questionable in my mind whether he did the Hebrew portion. I think that all you have to do is copy the Hebrew down from somebody else's Torah and then go over here and write your stuff in Aramaic. I don't know. It seems like you'd have to know some Hebrew to do what he did. But why he did everything literal is because he was Hellenized. Let's leave it at that. He had to have spoken Hebrew to do what he did. I'll have to give him that. But he had to have been Hellenized to make everything literal rather than recognizing the idioms. He didn't seem to recognize but just a couple of idioms. And it's even doubtful that he's the one that recognized them. It seems more to me like people after the fact recognized them and not him. So anyway, because everything he did was literal, most of it's wrong. Most of it. And since most of it's wrong, guess what happens with the sages when they're using something that's mostly wrong? They are mostly wrong. Everything that they argue, they're arguing from the literal point of view. And nothing about the biblical text is literal. That's all I'm trying to say. Finally, I cleared that up, I hope. Anyway, verse 9. Yeah, we have time. And be as came Moshe, the tent her, go down pillar the cloud and pillar entrance the tent and spoke with Moshe. This was kind of interesting. V'haya, so, and it came to pass, kevo, as came. And remember, everybody's watching him walk to the tent, right? So as he came to, it'll probably tell us, well, as Moshe, ha ohela. So as he came to the tent, and it's really literally the tent her. Why? Because the tent is set in the feminine. So as Moshe came to the tent, red. It's where you get Jared or Jared. It means to go down. It's like you start off life on a high point and you spend your whole life. It's funny to me because I had a son-in-law named Jared. Anyway, to go down, to descend, to go from a high elevation to a low elevation. So something is descending. What is it? Amud. What is that? It's a pillar, a column, a cloud, a pillar of fire, a pillar of smoke, right? And so what is this pillar? Anan. It's the pillar of the cloud. So a pillar of cloud came down as he reached the entrance of the tent. A pillar of cloud came down from above. The Amad and, well, saying pillar twice. And that pillar, Petach, was at the entrance, Ha-ohel, of the tent. Ve-diber, and it spoke, that pillar of cloud spoke, im, which is with, Moshe. So your translation. And it came to pass, as Moshe went to the tent, a pillar of cloud came down, and the pillar was at the entrance of the tent, and the cloud spoke with Moshe. The cloud spoke with Moshe. The cloud that was at the entrance of the tent. This kind of negates the Jewish teaching that the pillars were God's legs. How many legs speak with people? I'm just tossing that one out there. Gasuda wrote, the subject of the verb diber or daber would speak is the Lord, This is easily understood, even though not expressly stated. So he's saying that the pillar speaking is God speaking, not God's legs speaking, but God speaking. He's saying that ought to be obvious. Verse 10, and saw all the people, pillar of the cloud, stood entrance the tent and rise, all the people, and bow down, which is to worship, they, man entrance tent he. This one's a little funny, but it'll make sense. The ra, so, and saw. It's to see, to perceive, to understand, but it's mostly just you saw it with your eyeballs, right? Kol, so all ha'am, everybody, all the people saw something. I'm guessing it's the cloud, right? Et Amud, the pillar. He Anan. So they saw the pillar of the cloud. Everybody saw it. So there goes your idea that only the men are standing at the entrance, right? So because now we say everybody saw it. Omed, so they saw the pillar of cloud that stood. Petach, at the entrance. Ha'ohel, of the tent. So it's not inside the tent, it's at the entrance of the tent. It says, Vekam, and rose. It's to arise, to kumbad. It's that word a while ago, right? This is, wait a minute. They're standing up, watching him till he gets to the pillar. And now that he's at the pillar, everybody stands up. Kol, everybody, ha'am, all the people. Behish tahavu. This is literally, it's and bow down, but it's the idea to bow down to worship, right? To prostrate yourself on the ground and put your head on the ground like Jews used to do. Ish, now we go back to the man, said all the people, now it says worship, man, then it says Batak, entrance, halo, of his tent. So your translation is, and all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent. And all the people got up from their beds, they rose, and the men worshiped. The men bowed down with their heads to the ground at the entrance of his own tent. In case you're wondering, one verse says they stood until Moshe reached the tent. Here, although it says they rose, the people actually rose when Moshe approached the tent. This verse is a recap. Once the fire came down, all the people bowed down to worship. Rashi wrote that they bowed down to worship God, not Moshe. So I'm guessing someone must have asked him the question, or worse, someone was teaching it as Moshe worship, right? And so Rashi felt the need to clarify that. Verse 11, and spoke Yahweh to Moshe, faces to face, as that he speak man to companion, he, and returned to the encampment, and minister he Yehoshua, son Nun, boy, not he departed from midst the tent. It's one of my favorite verses of all time. Ve diber, and spoke. It's the setting in order, the ranging in order, the arranging the words in a row. It's not just saying stuff off the top of your head like I'm saying. It's like it's well thought out, it's written out, it's almost scripted, right? So these are very well thought out words, and it says Yahweh. So Yahweh said El to Moshe, Panim, which is the word for faces. Remember, if somebody's alive, they have faces because their face is moving. Even if you're asleep, your face is constantly moving. It'll move just from the breathing. There's movement just from the breathing in and out. So, but they're really more talking about when you're alive, you experience anger and sadness and happiness and grief, and exhilaration and all these different things. And so you have all these different faces. And so if you're alive, you have faces. It's not that you're a Trinity, the me, myself, and I Trinity. It's not that. It doesn't have anything to do with that sort of thing. It's just said in plural because in Hebrew, if you're alive or you're thinking of someone as though they're alive, you can do that because it works the same way with the word God. We say it in plural, Elohim, because the real God is alive. But if you think that your fake God is alive, that'll be written in plural as well, even though it's not alive. Anywho, so it says, God spoke to Moses, and then it says face, El, so it's panim, El, panim, faces to faces. So God's alive and Moshe's alive, and they are face to face. This is incredible. Ka'asher, as that, daber, as in the way that, literally this is he speak. It's the setting in the row, the arranging in order, the properly thought out words. As ish, as a man, el re'ehu, as a man to his, and I put companion. It's a companion, a friend, with whom one has conversation. Friend or companion is also said of a lover, one beloved of a woman. Any other person, any other of the human race, when preceded by the word ish, it means another. The thing that you have to understand here is the Puritans in the Dark Ages watered things way down. They didn't like the talk of God speaking to a man speaking to Moshe as a man to his lover. That was just too over the top for them. And you already had the problem with Onkelos not liking God having human attributes, because he saw it as, if we spoke of God as though he had human attributes, we're bringing God down to the level of man and not really realizing we're made in his image and his likeness. If we speak in a manner of a man to a woman, to a lover, then God can speak that way to us because we're created to be like him, right? It's not the other way around. We're not bringing God down. We have what we have because God made us this way, because that's the way he is. So it's us imitating, not being exactly like, but imitating. I'm sure that his hands are more dexterous, is that a word, than ours are. He may have more fingers. How do we know? They may be longer. They may be shorter. They may be, who knows? Ours is just, it's like us having a shadow. We're the shadow of God. So he's got digits. We don't know what they look like or what they're capable of, but I guarantee it's way more than us. That's all I'm saying. But we're not bringing God down. We're just realizing that we're somewhat like him. And that was intended by him. Anyway, so he's talking to like a man to a lover. What does it mean, like a man to his lover? Moses is a man. In this time period, in this world, the only way that a man could have a lover is if he had a wife. And the only way he had a wife was if the veil was removed, right? Because even though they're legally married, when they sign the ketubah, they don't live together. That comes later. That's the second part of the marriage. And when they come together later, they consummate the marriage. Before that's done, the first thing that happens when they get alone is that he removes the veil. And this is what we're supposed to see here when a man's talking to his lover. It means that the veil is removed. It means that nothing is hidden. Nothing is held back. Moshe could ask anything he wanted to ask, and God was going to answer it to the degree that Moshe could understand it, because there's just some stuff that if God told us, our brains would just melt out of our ears. We couldn't handle it. So to the degree that Moshe can handle it, there's nothing being held back here. And Moshe's not holding anything back from God. They have no secrets from each other. There are guys, guy friends that are like that. They know each other better than the person knows himself. That's all that's being said here. And then it says Veshav, and so someone's turning back, someone's turning away from something and going somewhere else, right? El, someone's turning to Ha-Mahena. So now they've had these conversations, and now it's time for Moshe to return to the camp. That's all it's saying. And now he's returning to the camp, because he didn't stay there in that tent. Umesharto, this is but minister he, the one who waited upon, the one who served, the one who took care of Moshe. But that guy, Yehoshua, to be exact, they call him Joshua, but his name was Yehoshua. Then it says Beam, which is son, Nun. So he's the son of some guy named Nun. And yes, N-U-N is pronounced Nun, not Nun. Son of Nun. He had no parents. No, he's the son of Nun. Then it says Na'ar. Na'ar. Now, if Daryl Lee, if you're listening, this is your word, Na'ar. Because I thought it was funny because we gave him this title, Na'ar, and now he's Na'ar Lee. Are you hearing it? Gnarly? Na'ar Lee. But it's the word for boy. It's used of both of a newborn child as well as a young man about 20. It is sometimes used emphatically to express tenderness of age. In other places, boy is rather the name of function and denotes servant, which it does here. So I'm going to leave the rest of that meaning out because, hang on, Daryl, we'll get to it. Then it's lo, so he didn't do something. Yamish, he did not depart. So this is a man that actually lived in the tent. See, Moshe didn't live in the tent because he returned to the camp. But this young man lived in the tent of meetings. He did not depart. Mitoch. He didn't depart from the middle of it. He was inside it in the middle, and he never left. Ha-ohel. Now, does that mean he never actually walked out? Oh, yeah, he did. He had to go to the bathroom. You know what I'm saying? He had to wash himself. He had to wash his clothing. None of that would have been possible inside. It's just that what they're telling you is he lived in the tent of meetings. All right, so your translation. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, bow my head there, face to face, holding nothing back. That's what as a man to his lover means. So he spoke face to face, holding nothing back. And he, speaking of Moshe, returned to the camp. But his Na'ar, his minister Yehoshua, the son of Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tent. In other words, he lived there. Kasuto wrote, Moses was not like one who sees visions or falls into a trance. He was in possession of his senses and heard the sound of words. At first I thought, why are you saying that, Kasuto? But then you realize most of these other people that we think of as prophets in the biblical era, they actually saw everything in a dream. Moshe was seeing it for real. He was seeing it face to face. He was hearing it with his own ears, seeing it with his eyes. The Seforno also argued that Moshe's communication with God was on a higher plane than that of Balaam, and they point out Numbers 24:4, because he had visions while asleep. So Balaam saw his visions when he was asleep, and Moshe's seeing it face to face. I don't know if that puts him on a higher plane. I think that's silly to say. I think it's dumb because that makes God a respecter of person, and God's not. All right. Other words, face to face. Onkelos' Shemot by Drazin and Wagner. By the way, if you're going to get a Onkelos, which I highly recommend, get this one. This set is awesome. The translation and the commentary is fabulous. You'll like it. Anyway, it says the phrase is clearly a metaphor since it contradicts verse 20. Verse 20 says that man cannot see God and live. All right. And that's a good point to make. Of the words, a young man. Now, are you listening, Daryl? Onkelos' Shemot by Drauzine and Wagner says, based on the Babylonian Talmud, Zevachim 11, or 118b rather, Ibn Ezra asked why the Bible would call Joshua a young man. He subtracts from Joshua's age at his death, he was 110, at 110 years, the 40 years when he was in the wilderness, and the 14 years he was involved in the conquest and distribution of the land among the tribes. The result is that he was 56 years of age. He explains that Joshua's service to Moses was performed in a youthful fashion. Not, which I find hysterical. Nachmanides suggests that the Bible often refers to an attendant as a young man, as in Joshua 6:23, 2 Samuel 2:14, and 2 Samuel 18:15, and 2 Kings 4:12. Nachmanides rightly wrote that Na'ar was a general term used for an attendant who ministers to someone. So in this case, it's a position. It's generally used of someone who is in training. And since Yehoshua ben Nun, the son of Nun, was training to take Moshe's place, he was called Na'ar. Now, if his last name would have been Lee, he would have been Gnarly. Just saying. Anyway. Let me see this. Okay. We'll be pushing it. But we got to move on to the next verse, which is 12. Now, about this verse, Kasuto wrote the following, and I quote, "In order to comprehend the dialogue in this paragraph properly, heed must be paid to the fact that this conversation is not conducted in accord with Greek or modern processes of logical thinking, but following the pattern of Eastern dialogues, which convey the intention of the speakers more by way of allusion than through explicit statements," which is what I've been saying all along. Anyone who knows me any amount of time has heard me talk about the idiomatic. And this is what he's saying. When he says, which convey the intention of the speaker more in a way of allusion, we'll replace that with my word idiomatic. They're speaking idiomatically, and that's how they describe things, is through their idiom. Through their idiomatic. It's not even that it's idiom. I call everything idiomatic, because if one word can be idiomatic, a very long phrase can be idiomatic, and an entire story can be idiomatic, right? But they're by allusion, and that's how they're trying to explain things. All right, so verse 12 literally would say, "And he said, Moshe, to Yahweh, see, you said to my that ascend the people to this, and you not make know you me that shall send with me, and you said he know me, you in name, and also found you grace in eyes mine." It will make sense. Vayomer, and he said, the primary signification is to bear forth, hence to shed light on the subject. So Moshe said, El Yahweh. So Moshe said to God. Remember, they're face to face. They're just having a conversation. This must be important. I made it blue. Oh, I almost passed up the next word. Re'eh. Re'eh. See. So he turns to the King of the universe and he says, see, to perceive, to understand. There's a note in the explanation given in the Jacinius. It says the Hebrews use of verbs of seeing of those things also which are not perceived by the eyes, but by other senses, as by hearing, taste, touch, feeling, of those things which are perceived, felt, and enjoyed by the mind, of the things which were perceived with the mind or heart, hence to perceive, to understand, to learn, to know. So all of this is factoring into what he just said to God. See, perceive, hear it, feel it, taste it, all of those things combine into that. Si ata, you see, omer. So somebody said something, someone shed the light on the subject, Eli, you said to me. So he's saying to God, you said to me, ha'al, which is that ascend or the ascent, to go up to a high place. Et ha'am, so ascend the people, hazeh, this people, not just any people, ve'ata, and you, lo hadatani, you didn't make known to me. You're telling me to take these people and ascend, take these people and we're going to take off, but you haven't told me, you haven't made it known to me. I haven't heard anything, I haven't smelled anything, I haven't tasted anything, I haven't experienced anything. I'm still in the dark about this because you haven't made me to know et asher, that which tishlach, or that whom, whom instead of which, tishlach, whom you're going to send. To send, because remember, he said he was going to send a messenger, right? You haven't made it known to me who the messenger is that you're going to send with me. And amarta, and you said, you brought it to light, you shed the light on the subject, yedaticha, he know me, you. In other words, I know you, I have experienced you, I've heard you, I've gotten to know you by touch, by, all these things, right? Beshem, by name. I know you by name. So he's saying, you've said to me, I know you by name. Begam. And also, mitzata, and you said that you found chen, you found grace, be'ene, in your eyes. So I've found grace in your eyes. You've said that. So your translation is, and Moshe said to Yahweh, see, you have said to me, make this people to ascend, but you've not made known to me whom you will send with me. And you, speaking of Yahweh, he's still talking to Yahweh, you have said to me, this is Moshe saying it, you've said to me, I know you by name. And also, you have found grace in my eyes. So in other words, God said, you have found grace in my eyes, because he's quoting God here. So the word see, Rashi pointed out that to see is to consider. So he's saying, consider. There's a reason for this. Of the words, you have not made known to me. Rashbam believed that Moshe was asking God to go personally, because he sees this as a complaint. In other words, you have said to me, I know you by name, and also you have found grace in my eyes. The question you have to ask is, where did God say these things? Because so far, it's not in any of the text. Kasuto wrote, in the book of Exodus, we do not find that these words were said to Moshe. Well, he said Moses. But apparently this divine communication was expressly recounted in one of the passages of the epic poem current among the people. Although the Torah did not cite the exact statement before, it did not refrain from alluding to it in this verse, since the matter was known to the people from another source, and at all events agreed in substance with what Scripture itself had recorded, and as it were, included between the lines in its account of the theophany. That'd be like God in the bush. Oh yeah, he does say at the thorn bush. Onkelos, Saadia, and Rashi all agree that it means I have distinguished you by name, whatever that means. I truly do not understand why it is not all right for God to have conversation with Moshe that were not written down. I don't see why that's a problem. You would think that all the time he spent with God, not everything got put to pen, on paper, if you will. I know it didn't exist back then. I'm not suggesting that it did. I'm just idiomatic here. If Moshe wrote that God said these things, then God said these things. Can't we just accept that? We do not need any further source. I tried to figure out what epic poem Kasuto was talking about, because he keeps talking about the epic poem in his book. What epic poem? He never explains which one he's talking about. There used to be at one point really only one from that time period. Now there's a bunch. There's been a lot found since this time. So I can't even be sure. But I do know that the main one that existed during Kasuto's time doesn't say anything about this. So why would this man, who was an expert about that epic poem, that pretty much one and only that existed in his time period, suggest that maybe it said it in something that he knew didn't say it? I don't know. That one kind of confuses me. Anyway, that's as far as we can get today. We really don't have time to go any further. Hope to see you back next week, y'all. Shalom, Shalom.